So folks, welcome to the League of Women Voters usual second Friday this month, third Friday morning sort of public discussion. We have tonight, or today, I should say, we have this morning a review of the recent actions at town meeting. The speaker is Neil Wishinsky, former select board chair, currently a member of the advisory committee. As everyone knows, the advisory committee reviews the warrant articles before town meeting. We've asked Neil to summarize the articles, or a set of articles, and to make some comments about where there will be either next steps or immediate impact or any other consequences that would rise from the votes of town meeting. We're asking everyone to use the chat for questions. And what I would like to do is we'll take a sort of maybe a cluster of items, and then we'll stop and say, are there any questions? And then we'll move on to the next cluster of items. We're not taking up any other topics other than what was voted or on the warrant for town meeting. I know there's been some speculation online about a charter commission discussion, but I will say that the league has been planning a series of what we were calling sort of voter education community events during the January through probably April of next year, of community information about town government. And as a result of the discussion that we're aware of about a charter commission, what we will start with is the history of Brookline town government, and we'll move forward to a discussion of what would be the steps involved in creation of a charter commission and any other possible proposals for change in town government. And for the record, the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, encourages informed discourse and active participation in government through voter education. Okay, folks. Neil, welcome.
Howdy, yeah. Howdy, everybody, and I'd like to thank the league, Betsy and Ernie especially, for inviting me. And I've been asked to kind of go through the warrant and summarize what's happened. And I'm going to try to do it from kind of a neutral perspective. Everybody comes into it with a viewpoint, and I'll try to, as much as I can, leave my viewpoint out of it, and just kind of deliver the facts. That has the potential of being a rather dry presentation. I'll try not to be especially dry, so we'll see if I can thread that needle. So this town meeting had probably the most warrant articles of any town meeting I've been involved in the last, and I've been involved for the last 20 years.
If I can add, since I have some history there too, it's certainly the longest one I can recall.
Yeah, and Betsy started before I did. So we had 42 warrant articles between technically two town meetings, two special town meetings, and that's quite remarkable. And a lot of the reason for that is because in May we postponed a bunch of warrant articles to November, thinking the pandemic might be over by then. Well, it wasn't. So we've had our second town meeting by Zoom, which has been actually an interesting experience. I think overall, my own impression is it worked rather well. I personally missed the personal interaction. It's something else to have a bunch of people in a room and you can talk to each other and get a sense of the room in a way that you really can't over Zoom. But I think debates ran longer in this format, and more people participated in the debates, and there tended to be I think motions tended, when a motion was called, it was more likely to vote to continue the debate. And I don't know if that was because of the way the voting went, the voting was more accurate, or people wanted to hear more. But I think more, the bottom line is more people spoke, I think, at this town meeting than at an in-person town meeting, and there was a wider, and maybe that resulted in a more thorough conversation with respect to the warrant articles. We went, what, 6-7 nights? It was certainly the longest town meeting I've been involved in. So in terms of the warrant articles, the way I've been thinking about it is kind of in clusters. And I'll describe the clusters and then dive into it. So the first cluster I'll talk about is two warrant articles that are going to result in ballot questions in May. And so you'll be hearing more about them. I presume there are going to be campaigns. But I'll just mention them and move on. And then, of course, with every town meeting, we deal with the budget. This is an especially challenging year for the budget, and we'll talk about that. Then there were a series of warrant articles that I'll kind of describe as a theme of inclusiveness and equity. And then one that kind of stands on its own, and there was a warrant article about tobacco control, which was interesting. Then there were a couple of warrant articles on land use planning and housing affordability. And lastly, the category I'll talk about is the fossil fuel free warrant articles. That doesn't cover all the warrant articles. We only have, what, an hour? So, I can't cover everything. So let's circle back to the ballot questions. So the town meeting voted to put the CPA, the Community Preservation Act, on the ballot. So in May, the voters will have the opportunity to vote for the Community Preservation Act. You may recall, for those of you who are around, I think it was about 15 years ago, there was a CPA question on the ballot. That one was to have a surcharge of 3%. We went for the gusto, and the voters rejected it. This time around, it's a much more modest proposal. This is a 1% surcharge, so it won't be as impactful as the last one. Last time there was a lot of thought that went into the structure of the CPA committee. This time around, there's nothing yet that specifies how that's going to work. I presume that'll be determined later, or that would be done through a warrant article. The makeup of the exact makeup of the committee and some of the structures around the decision process and how the funds would be expended. There are some statutory provisions that dictate on categories of projects that you can expend funds: affordable housing, preservation, open space. And then, of course, there's a state match, which is back when it was on the ballot 15 years ago. The match for a couple of years would have been a 100% match. Now it's down to, I think they're projecting 12 or 13%. So that's pretty much it with the CPA. Then the next warrant article is town clerk warrant article. Town meeting voted to put to the voters the question of whether the town clerk should be appointed. As you may know, the town clerk currently is an elected position. that's kind of a leftover from years past when a number of administrative positions were elected until the 90s, I believe. The town treasurer was elected. And as you know, Pat Ward, who is very popular town clerk, has been very ill. So this seems to be a good time to put it on the ballot. What'll be interesting is the town clerk is up for re-election. So on the same ballot will be someone running for town clerk, potentially for a position that maybe might go away. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works. So those are the two ballot questions that I know of that came out of this particular town meeting.
So Neil, just to be clear,
Yes.
the vote to make the town clerk an appointed position is on the same ballot as the vote to elect a town clerk in the spring of 2020.
Correct.
Okay.
And the CPA, and then two select board positions, school committee.
The usual other stuff.
The usual others. So this is going to be, I think, an active election season coming up. The next category of warrant articles pertains to the budget. And as you all know, with the effects of COVID, revenues are down and expenses are up. So that puts a lot of pressures on the budget. To give you a little idea, the main part of I think about 67% of town revenues are accounted for by property taxes. And that is a stable form of revenue. What isn't stable and is subject to economic conditions are things like meals tax, hotels tax, parking meters, and now the new marijuana revenue. And at last March, when everything shut down, that source of revenue just dried up completely and really created a big revenue hole. So that lined up with the fact that expenses are up. Every year, most of the town's expenses, the majority of town's expenses, are people and subject to union contracts, and their salaries escalate, health insurance goes up. So and then we have expenses relating to COVID itself. So there's a heck of a lot of pressures on the budget. And then there's also, I think, renewed is the wrong word. I think there's more of a real sensitivity as to how vulnerable populations are affected, especially in the economy. And that resulted in a proposal that came in kind of at the last minute to shift monies from the town's reserve fund to the food pantry and to the Brookline Housing Authority. I personally found that very alarming because the reserve fund. You look at what happened yesterday. We had a big snowstorm, and what pays for that? The reserve fund. And we also last night, the advisory committee, we took I think $500,000 to pay for COVID testing. So those are very precious funds that give us some flexibility to respond to emergencies. But the outcome at town meeting was to shift $300,000 of federal CARES money and target it towards the food pantry. So I think while I personally may not have agreed with the tactic, the policy objective of trying to address some of the impacts of COVID on vulnerable populations was achieved. And fortunately, we found a revenue source to fund it. Of course, the CARES Act money at the end of this month goes away, and depending on what Congress does, we may not have that source of funds going forward. So that's kind of what happened with the budget. There were some other proposals that were built into the budget. Some monies, there was some additional monies given to the schools to address COVID, and a few other odds and ends. There was Article 32 was a budget equity resolution, which resulted in a working group appointed to report on how to repair certain racial and other disparities, and see if we can come up with some funding sources. And that's supposed to be reporting prior to the close of the warrant in March, so that some of their recommendations can be built into the budget. That's going to hit up against, of course, the other realities of the budget. So I don't know how that's going to play out, and I guess we'll see. And then Article 33 was a town school partnership resolution looking for more transparency in the town school partnership, an increase in community engagement, and also a proposal to consider something called participatory budgeting, which would put a portion of the budget out for public discussion. And I believe the city of Boston is starting to try it for a small piece of their budget. And another piece of it is to review the use of free cash, and how some of the policies surrounding free cash have been used. And what free cash is kind of the leftover money at the end of the fiscal year. If we haven't spent as much as we've budgeted, there's some money left over, and typically that is one-time money. It's treated as one-time money, and we use it to fund one-time things like capital projects and beefing up reserves. We use it to beef up the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and there have been some other uses, one-time uses, and but the policy has kind of been on automatic pilot for the last maybe 10 years or so, and I think it's a good time to review it, and it's also a good time to review it now that there's more of an equity lens that's being applied to the budget. So it's a good time to review. It's a good time to look at it with this new lens on the budget. The next category of warrant articles, I'm calling warrant articles with an inclusiveness and equity theme.
Neil, can I stop you just for a moment?
Yes.
Just because we announced at the beginning and not everybody may have heard it, please put your questions in the chat. I'm pausing just to say, if you have a budget question, now would be a good time to put it forward. Otherwise, we'll carry on. And I don't see anything in the chat. So Neil, go forward.
Yeah, I actually would like more of a back and forth. I find those more interesting than just having a talking head. But I'll continue until someone breaks in. The next category of warrant articles had kind of the theme of inclusiveness and equity. And in this series of warrant articles, I'm including Article 8, which was an article to expand the Housing Advisory Board and add add the consumers of the product of that board, affordable housing, tenants and residents, to bring more of a consumer's view to that board. That board has actually been in my view, when I was on the select board, I always viewed that board as a very well-functioning board. It's been the guardian of the town's housing trust fund. And I think there was a desire amongst town meeting members to kind of broaden the portfolio of the board and bring in some new viewpoints. And the town meeting warrant article brought the membership up from 8 to 10 members, 3 of which needed to be affordable housing tenants or residents. The next warrant article I'll just mention is a warrant article to look at ranked choice voting. And it was a resolution that gave a sense of town meeting to come up with an implementation plan on ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting allows you to indicate your first choice, second choice, third choice if there are multiple candidates. It's used in Maine, and it's also used in Cambridge, a different offshoot. A very complicated implementation of it is in Cambridge. Exactly how we would implement it would need to be a part of the study, and kind of the poster child for the need for it was what happened in the 4th Congressional District, where I think there may have been a different outcome if we had ranked choice voting. And what ranked choice voting under one implementation is, if everyone's first choice doesn't get a majority, the person with the lowest number of first choice votes would be eliminated, and then have their votes reallocated, and then they go through that process until someone gets a majority. So
just for information purposes, there were 11 candidates in that 4th district race, which is an example of exactly the situation that people have discussed ranked choice voting. When there's only 2 candidates or 3 candidates, it wouldn't have much impact. But when there are 11, it definitely would have it could make a significant change in the outcome.
Yeah, and what'll be interesting here is how will it work when there are multiple seats? So if there are 2 select board seats up for election, and let's say you have 5 candidates, how is that going to work? Cambridge has a version of it that is very complicated, and whether their version is what we would adopt or some other version or not. I do believe too that it would, though I'm not certain on this, that it would have to go to the voters. It would certainly need home rule legislation. So the next item I think was not so controversial, and this is notices to tenants for things like zoning, if there are projects going on. Typically what has happened is under current law, owners are notified of when projects are happening, and tenants are not necessarily notified. This warrant article mandates the notification of tenants, and this was not at all controversial, made absolute sense to me. We were told that it's practical. And the notice would go to, it wouldn't go necessarily to a name, it would go to a resident. And that's what makes it practical, because the town doesn't.
Just to sort of elaborate on this, typically, if there was a project with a multi-unit building, and it could be anywhere from 4 to 20 or 100, only the property owner, or maybe possibly management, would ever have received notice in the past. This is to give the residents notice of a potential change.
Right.
And many of the residents are registered voters. So in many ways, it's addressing an oversight.
Right. There was another warrant article that eliminated gender pronouns throughout our town bylaws. That sailed through both the town bylaw and the zoning bylaw. So he and him, he and her are gone, and selectmen and all those kinds of gender pronouns have been eliminated from our town bylaws. There was a warrant article on advisory committee membership, and that's kind of inside baseball. But I think it was indicative of some unhappiness with the advisory committee and an attempt to broaden the diversity of membership on the advisory committee. What makes that interesting to me is the advisory committee. It's a very big time and effort commitment, and historically we've always had difficulty recruiting folks for the advisory committee. In the end, there wasn't a lot of change that came out of the final vote. It allowed for more what we call at-large members, members who are not town meeting members. It went from 8 to 10. I think that in terms of the membership of the committee, that was the only change. But what's also happening is the committee members are appointed by the town moderator, Sandy Gadsby, and he has appointed a committee to help him with recruitment. And so we'll see if that committee can do a bit more outreach and make the process of appointments a little more transparent. And I think so. We'll see how that works. Time will tell. The last series of warrant articles under my inclusiveness and equity wrapper were 2 warrant articles that were resolutions that select board members and school committee members should be paid. And that was actually the second time around. The first time around, I was actually one of the co-petitioners. This time around, I wasn't. It did not pass. Last time around, it didn't pass. It was a very, very close vote. This time around, it did not pass. It wasn't as close, but it wasn't a 2/3 majority. But there was a lot of sentiment to pay the select board and school committee. At one level, I personally think it's unfair to demand what we demand of our select board and school committee as volunteers. But on the other hand, where's that money going to come from? And in this time of real budget pressures, the proposal would have cost $300,000 to start. And, there was no funding source identified. And then there was some discussion of city charter, which I'll stay away from. That was a piece of that. So, any questions
Neil,
on that series. Yeah.
there's a question about the advisory committee and how the allocation of representation among precincts was finally,
Yeah, there was no change. To the extent practicable, there needs to be a member, a town meeting member from each precinct in the end. There was some different permutations of that in the lead up to town meeting, but in the end, that's what was voted.
and just for the whole record, there are 30 members of the advisory committee.
Up to 30.
Up to 30 and 16 precincts. So it means
Right.
16 members would theoretically represent each precinct, and the balance could come from other locations. But is there a limit of numbers of AC members from each precinct?
Yes, there's a limit of 4 per precinct and a limit of 10 non-town meeting members.
Okay.
It's a very large committee. It's the largest. The advisory committee is the town finance committee, and it's the largest finance committee in the state. More typically in other communities, they tend to be 7 to 11 members. We have 30.
And also in those committees, those communities, they typically are finance committees, which review the budget and don't take on the other warrant articles. They might from time to time, but that's not their major charge.
Right. We take on, actually, one of the little administrative changes is the advisory committee now has an option of which articles to make recommendations on. Whereas previously, by bylaw, the advisory committee needed to make recommendations on all warrant articles. I think there was as the warrants got longer, I think there really was a desire to kind of see if we could cut down the workload, especially on warrant articles where the advisory committee really doesn't have anything to add. You know, if there's a warrant article to impeach the president, you know, what can the advisory committee add to that? You know, you bring your own you know, viewpoints and stuff like that. So I see a question: why is the advisory committee so large? How did it become that way? I don't know the answer, how it became that way. Maybe some others who've been around longer. And how does it work with such a large group? Takes a lot of patience and a strong chair to keep things moving. And we've been fortunate to have strong chairs. There on this call, there are 2 former chairs of the advisory committee. Sergio Modigliani, I see, is on the call, and of course Betsy, DeWitt, and they were both strong chairs. And somehow it seems to work for the most part.
What I would say, at least about the size, was as the mandate or the charge was not just to be the finance committee, but also to review warrant articles. It is absolutely right, needed the number of bodies that you require to do that level of work. But also, in fairness, the expectation and desire was to have a broad representation of the community, in a sense, and that's why 1 from each precinct for sure. But also the idea was to be, in effect, it's the standing committee of town meeting. And it was meant to have a subset, so to speak, of the town meeting membership as members of the advisory committee. Now, why the number 30, I can't say, but that number was meant to be large enough to undertake the broader charge of the Brookline Advisory Committee.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting, you know, the number of folks on the committee has over the years fluctuated. In my experience, it's fluctuated between maybe 22 and then up to the maximum of 30. I found over time, when you got around 25 or 24 or 25, the workload just became too much for individual members. And I don't know, the sweet spot seemed to be 27-ish. 30, it's starting to get big. And I'll second what Betsy said. Given the broad scope of the committee and the things that it studies, having a large committee with a diverse skill set has been quite beneficial to the town, I think, and then making sure that there's the good geographic representation. So, okay, I'll move on. So the next warrant article is not it's not a series of warrant articles, but I'll just mention it. Town meeting passed a tobacco control warrant article whereby no one born after January 1st, 2000 can purchase tobacco in Brookline. So this is an attempt to cut down on tobacco sales and wean folks off tobacco. The stated goal by the petitioner was that anybody who could purchase tobacco today could continue to purchase tobacco, but no one else. We were warned that there's potential for disapproval by the Attorney General. There is evidently some years ago, there was a state law that forbids municipalities from having lower age restrictions than state law allows, and this could come under that category. So we can expect the Attorney General to weigh in one way or the other. So it's not a sure thing that this is going to take effect. The next category of warrant articles come under what I'm calling land use planning and housing affordability. And there were two warrant articles in this category. One pertained to micro units, and what those are, very, very small apartments. And back when we were studying the zoning for what's now what we're calling the Emerald Island, this is the industrial zone on Brookline Avenue where there's a hotel going up, Brookline and Route 9, Brookline Avenue and Route 9. There was an inadvertent change to the zoning bylaw that that's set up a circumstance where only small micro units are allowed in that in the Emerald Island, and it outlawed it in other parts of town. And this was an attempt to bring it back to other parts of town. And what that did, it kind of opened up a debate on how are we doing zoning, and how are we are we approaching zoning in a comprehensive manner, and implementing a comprehensive plan and taking a holistic look at zoning. And in the past, what we've been doing is we've been reacting to specific projects, and that's how we rezoned Brookline Place, the Emerald Island, the Homewood Suites on Route 9, even Waldo Durgan in Coolidge Corner. And I think there's a desire amongst many people, myself included, to really to be less reactive, to be proactive, and figure out beforehand, before a proposal comes to us, what do we want? And this opened up that debate. And I see Linda Pelkey is on the call. Linda put forward a proposal that this be referred to a study committee to look at zoning in the broader context. That proposal failed, and what did come out of it was a referral to bring this back to make some technical corrections in May. And what was interesting is as the article was put forward, it came as more people were looking at it. Some technical problems were found with it. As close to the weekend before town meeting, Dick Benka, town meeting member, former select board member, found a big problem with it, and that really pushed us to refer. And then the question was, should we refer narrowly to look at that one little technical problem, or should we take a broader look? And town meeting in the end said, okay, let's take the narrower look. We also heard assurances from the planning department that they are looking at some broader housing and zoning policies. And that actually brings us to Article 34, which is housing resolution. And that was a resolution that tries to reprioritize the production of housing as a main priority of the town's planning efforts. And there were two proposals that came to town, two versions of it that came to town meeting. One was by the proponents, which wanted town meeting to declare up front the production of housing as a primary planning objective. And then the advisory committee kind of tempered it a bit by saying, okay, before we make that declaration, we want some more study, and we want to look at the impacts. And that produced a debate at town meeting. And in the end, town meeting voted on the advisory committee version. What's interesting to me is if you read the text of the two proposals, they really weren't that different. And I think in the end, the outcome of that is going to be one, a redo and review of the town's housing production plan, which has been in the works and is continuing. It was discussed the other night at the Housing Advisory Board. So that's continuing. So in terms of the result, I don't know one way or the other if the town's policies are going to be that much different between the two versions. And I guess in the end, there's more to come, and the devil's really going to be in the details, because in order to produce more housing, there's going to have to be a change in zoning, and there's going to have to be specific proposals, and that's where the rubber's going to meet the road in the end. So I think that's kind of all I want to say on those two warrant articles. The last series of warrant articles I'll mention are two warrant articles regarding fossil fuel-free construction. And for those of you who follow town meeting, you may remember back a year ago, town meeting voted to a bylaw change that would require new construction and significant renovations to not have any fossil fuel piping. And that was disapproved by the Attorney General under the theory that the town, that's an attempt to impose requirements in stricter than the state building code, and the town doesn't have the authority to do that. That was a rather groundbreaking article, and it was actually an example of how a group can bring something that on its face can be quite controversial, work the system, present facts in such a way to achieve consensus and be willing to compromise around the edges and still maintain the core of your policy. It was really I think a political tour de force by the group that brought it. And in the end, back a year ago, I think it was almost unanimous that this groundbreaking, in many other circumstances, quite controversial warrant article would achieve almost unanimity. It really was quite an accomplishment. But the Attorney General disallowed it. So, but it's not all for naught, because it set a pattern, and other municipalities, not only around the state but around the country, are looking at what we did. But in this town meeting, there were two warrant articles. One, Article 39, which was home rule legislation to enable us to implement what we voted a year ago. And I don't know what the prospects for that are. I don't know if I should be optimistic or not, maybe not. But then there was another article, which was a resolution, which was a call to action for the state to amend the building code. So that's my summary of what happened at town meeting.
Neil, will you let me speak on the last item?
Sure, by all means.
So as you guys know, as an architect in my own profession,
Tell us who you are.
I'm sorry, I'm Sergio Modigliani. I'm, as was previously identified, a former chair, former town meeting member, former member of the planning board, et cetera, et cetera. This energy issue is one that's obviously critical. Any of us who have grandchildren understand that if they're going to have a future, we have to act on the fossil fuel problem. When the Article 21 in Brookline was first brought to my attention 2 years ago, I was an enthusiastic supporter, but I also immediately told everybody I wasn't going to spend a minute working on it for the town. And the reason is very simple. As you've heard, the town may not modify the state code. So the effort has to be at the state level, which is what that resolution, I think, was trying to do. And I and others have been working at the state level with the American Institute of Architects, trying to get the Bureau of Building Regulation and Standards, the BBRS, which is the state body in charge of the state code, to make changes. They are coming, but it's not going to happen tomorrow because there are huge interests, financial, economic, and so forth, that are tied up with the natural gas industry. And if you recall the problem that occurred a few years ago in the Lowell Chelmsford area with the horrendous natural gas problems that they had, remember that if we capitate, that is, if we cut off new customers to the gas industry, they're left with maintaining the infrastructure with fewer and fewer customers. That creates what's known as a death spiral. Mm-hmm. The company goes bankrupt, and we're left with dealing with these thousands of miles of pipeline. So this is not a simple problem. We all know it has to happen, but the energy expended personally in town meeting and developing this was for naught.
Okay.
Wow. Well, thank you, Sergio. I don't know, encouraging or discouraging.
No, it's a tough battle.
No, but I think it's fair to outline what is involved, as in so many of these cases, when we have a good reason to want to change policy or regulations, then you have to go through layers and layers and layers of both regulatory and, let's call it, historic practice to be able to accomplish it. So I appreciate your explaining what's involved.
It isn't going to happen because of the town. It's going to happen at a different level. That's really the point.
Needs a much broader constituency.
Exactly. And not to in any way diminish the importance and the urgency, because it's critical. It really is something that's critical.
Right.
The one thing the town action did is it highlighted the issue. It brought attention, and I don't know if that was a complete waste of time. So I don't know if I agree.
It never hurts to publicize the issue. It's just that there were literally thousands of person hours that were devoted at EDAB and in other places in town meeting to develop the details of that proposal.
Yep.
Right down to the fact that commercial kitchens in a restaurant were going to be exempted because they needed gas, and how many seats, and and all of that. It's all thrown out the window by the Attorney General. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that we need to be thoughtful about how we focus the energy and skills that we have in the town of Brookline and put the pressure where it needs to be put.
But it's good to have the question as brought before the public with more public engagement. Absolutely. I think we're all in favor of that. So would anyone else like to comment? We don't have a hand raising device, I think, but we would certainly hear from folks if you want to speak. Linda Pelkey, I see you've said you'd like to comment. If you want to unmute yourself, wherever you are out there.
Yes, hello. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Betsy, thanks. I guess I just wanted to follow up on the micro unit and housing warrant articles on planning and zoning just a little bit, because I think the distinction between the advisory committee version of warrant article 34, which concerned itself with should the town commit itself to producing a great deal more housing versus do we need to first understand what the impacts of that might be, I think was a critical distinction. And because town meeting passed that version, we need to study this issue, then the question became, how are we going to study it? And is it going to be in the planning department, or what my proposal was to make it a much more public facing action and process and discussion. So my referral motion for the micro units also tied in the housing production question and asked for there to be a select board appointed committee on oversight for planning and zoning, and to actually begin a process of reigniting our efforts to do a comprehensive plan and folding in this question of understanding impacts. And just to highlight a contrast, last night, I joined some of my town meeting colleagues at the planning board concerning ourselves with a historic home across from town hall that was slated to be demolished, 370 Washington. And we managed to convince the planning board not to demolish that structure, but the involvement and the comments made, I think, highlight people's concern about the character of the community and about trying to get a handle on what it is we do care about, what we do want to preserve, and where we might be able to make changes. And I think this is just a huge question that should not be internalized to the planning department. It should be a discussion more broadly in the community. I also attended a Boylston Street corridor study committee where we heard a presentation from a developer explain to us, because of the cost of housing and construction, that any new housing built in Brookline will be luxury housing. Perhaps unless the town itself owns the land and we could do something creative, like a community land trust for affordable housing. But I think those two things, we do need to get going on these issues. We do need to have broader analysis and more discussion. So I hope in the future we can revisit this topic and delve into it more. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. John Harris, you've asked to speak. You out there?
Yes, hi, thank you very much. John Harris, and a town meeting member and co-chair of Climate Action Brookline. And just very briefly, to a little bit more about the fossil fuel free warrant articles. The petitioners, it was a single group that both years, last year and this year, pushed this. They knew from the get-go that this was a major uphill battle, but they went ahead anyway, and it served to be a huge and very effective publicity and education campaign on the issue. It spurred a national conversation, including the Rocky Mountain Institute, I think it's called, which is a national alternative energy advocacy and study group. And it led to fantastically good and educational discussions at the town level in the advisory committee and elsewhere. And it had a fantastic, excellent, specific almost success in a bizarre way, which is that the Attorney General's decision was very clear. It said that their office, their consumer office, very strongly was in favor of the intent of the fossil fuel free building warrant articles, but it was constrained by the specificities of state building codes. And so therefore what it did is it threw the issue specifically as a political challenge to the BBRS, the group that will update the building codes. So as a wider political, in the narrow sense, it failed, and they knew it well might, but in the wider sense, it started actually an excellent discussion and political pressure to do these updates on the building codes. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Let's see, Jonathan Klein, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, two comments. One is that on the fossil free fuel article, it's hard to say. So for me, I agree that it actually spurred a lot of education. And I'll just say personally, my initial reaction to it when I heard it about it was to say, oh, that's not practical. Can't possibly do that. Electricity is, less efficient and more expensive than gas fuel. And through the course of that warrant article, I became educated by hearing from the proponents and learning about the issues, and switched my position on it. I think there were a lot of other people in town that learned a lot about the long range, challenges to our grid and the benefits of, making it more electric and creating more electric demand and all those things. And the cost differential is not as huge as we thought it was. So it was very helpful to me, and I think it was helpful as well. I also want to comment on the housing issue and the comment that Linda made about kind of, because of the cost, any new housing in Brookline is going to be luxury housing. That's just not true. We've been building, very successfully over the last 3 or 4 years and permitting a number of 40B projects. I know some people find them controversial and some people love them more and some people love them less. But the truth is that every one of those projects has had 20 to 25% of its units as affordable. Some of the other units are luxury, some of the other units are more moderate. So it's absolutely possible to build, mixed income and affordable housing, given the right zoning provisions that allow, mid-level and mid-rise, multifamily buildings to be built. So I think we need to stay focused on that.
I think the challenge is going to be what's going to happen in the post 40B world. So we're right now.
Exactly.
We're right now over the 10%, so we can say no. And just because we can say no doesn't mean we should say no. And I think we shouldn't say no to everything. You know, there's going to be a knee jerk. Oh, it's a 40B, it's bad. But you know, some people, and I don't think that way at all. You know, to us at this point, 40B can be just another permitting vehicle, you know, and allows us flexibility, and we can have friendly 40Bs if necessary. But I think the better approach, if possible, is to take a hard look at zoning, but it's going to have to be targeted. I don't think doing anything blanket across the town is going to be very difficult. So, but we'll see where that goes.
And I think just from the perspective of somebody who's been involved in housing, the town did go through a housing production planning process. I guess it was finished maybe 2 or 3 years ago. My comment only is simply that it was a very inclusive process. There were a lot of large public meetings and many people had an opportunity to contribute. I'm not saying that the result is necessarily the correct one for now, but I do believe, and I just want to say for the record, that it's not that the town has totally neglected that conversation, but I will comment just based on what people are saying right now, and that is that those warrant articles, even if they don't get passed or if they're resolutions, provoke a conversation which often leads to a next step, which moves us in a direction. And I would use the micro units kind of as an example. By golly, unintended consequences. The notion when they were first discussed for a single planning district was these would be a desirable thing to add to the town's zoning. And then unintentionally, it was prevented. And it seems to me that's a conversation that's an important one to continue, because it's an alternative type of housing that could have it could be a very helpful thing to add to our mix. All I'm trying to say is more conversation, more thorough research and discussion in order to be able to make good decisions going forward. And I hope that that's the kind of process that this community continues to be engaged in. I don't have any more questions. Lots of comments, which I recommend everybody to read the chat and get your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to comment?
Yes, hello.
Okay, one more. Hey, hi, Donna.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask a question, Betsy. So, fast forwarding the tape, so to speak, what would be the criteria when someone is looking for a permit to build housing, whether they would be required to incorporate 25% of the units for affordable housing versus not? So a decision has to be made, you know, no to somebody, yes to somebody else. How would that process play out? Do you understand my question?
I'll take a shot. Under the town's inclusionary zoning, if the proposal is for more than, I think it's 15 units, or actually it was just changed. Well, if the proposal is for more than a certain number of units, let's just leave it at that.
Maybe 6 now.
Yeah, it's down to 6. Okay. The developer must include 15% affordable. So then under 40B, you need to either include 20% or 25%, depending on the income level, affordable units. And then the question is, okay, when will that 40B be considered a friendly 40B versus a not friendly 40B? Well, until just a few months ago, we didn't have the ability to say no. We were under the 10% safe harbor. So the developer was in the driver's seat. Now we can say no, and it's really a political question. How do people feel about the particular development? And there's no clear criteria
Can I
that
just
I'm
throw
aware
in
of.
here? 40B, it's a state, it's product of the state legislation. It's state legislation. It can be done under certain conditions, but its major characteristic, if I can call it that, is when a developer wants to use 40B, local zoning is not considered, or doesn't apply. So local zoning regulations, as long as the developer meets the building code standards and provides the percentage of affordability, local zoning doesn't apply. So it has at least been in Brookline, which is a very attractive residential community. Typically 40Bs have been brought by developers who want to do a large number of units. And historically, I'm regretful that they have chosen to include 20%, not 25%, which is the range that's in the legislation. That, again, to repeat what Neil said, once you've hit a percentage of affordable units in the community, and it's based on the total inventory of units in the town, once the town reaches the threshold of 10%, 40Bs no longer may be invoked, and therefore development is subject to local zoning. That's the big 40B picture. And as Neil says, at the moment, it appears that the town has reached the 10%. And so other projects will go forward, but they will not be 40Bs.
Oh,
Thank you. So you use the word political, Neil, a political decision. Can you expound upon that?
so first, I'll just say something Betsy said, that a proposal can be made under 40B. Now, even if we're over the 10%, a developer can propose a 40B, and then it's up to the town, the zoning board of appeals, whether or not to approve it. So technically, it would be a decision of the zoning board of appeals, but it would there would be a process where there could be community input, and there'd be a series of public hearings where folks, neighbors, not neighbors, people around town would be able to express their views. So, is that a political process? Yes. It's also a technical legal process. There won't be a town meeting vote. It would be a vote of the zoning board of appeals listening to, and quote, the community.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I've got a correction about in the inclusionary zoning bylaw. Appears that now the minimum number of units are the impact of inclusionary zoning would begin with 4 or more units.
Yeah, could I clear up a couple things on that? Just really factual. I don't want to be argumentative.
Go ahead with facts, please.
Yeah, so
Like that.
under the inclusion, I'm on the, Jonathan Klein, I'm a member of the Housing Advisory Board. And we're very pleased that we have amended the inclusionary zoning bylaw. And it now does apply to projects of 4 units or more. And it is a requirement for 15% affordability. But there is a provision that between 4 units and I believe 19 units, there is an option for a developer who doesn't want to provide 15% affordability, because it's hard to provide 15% of a low number of units. There is a buyout provision. So there's a amount that they can pay into the Affordable Housing Trust.
Yep.
So the other thing I wanted to clarify was about 40B. Under 40B, the project can either be 20% or 25% affordable. So if it's 20% affordable, then the units have to be affordable at 50% of area median income. And if it's 25% affordable, then they can go up to 80% of median income. So there's a choice. And it seems that many developers have chose the 20% at 50%, but that's a choice that the developer has. And either are permitted under 40B.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more comments? Then I will have to say, this has been a very interesting discussion. Really appreciate everyone's participation. And Neil, thank you very much for your clear and articulate summaries. And I'm going to go back and say that what I heard was how many people had thoughts that were triggered by these warrant articles, not necessarily ones that people all were in support of, but just simply to say that the discussion broadly across this town meeting was very important and affects policy decisions that will be important as we go forward. So it's an important thing to hear about what the town meeting has been doing. And it's important for town meeting to continue to do it, I guess is where I'm trying to say here. And in closing, thank you very much, Neil, for your summary.